Good Sunday night to you. I am Thabo Mdluli, and thank you for joining us tonight here on the Newsfeed Late Night. How do we change and reposition the image of Africa for the future? Professor of Law, High Court of Kenya advocate, and PLO Lumumba Foundation founder Patrick Lumumba joins us now to help us unpack this question. You can also be a part of the conversation tonight. You can tag us on Twitter at Newsroom405, WhatsApp your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584. Prof. PLO Lumumba, good evening, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Thabo, and thank you very much for inviting me. And let me at the very outset say that I condole with South Africans on the 20th anniversary of the very tragic events at Ellis Park. I have no doubt that those memories are saddening, but yet hope is the eternal spirit that keeps us alive.
Yes, indeed. Hope springs eternal, or so they say. We are located in South Africa, but of course located in the broader continent, and there are a number of issues that are festering around the continent that I'm hoping we will get to actually unpack and talk a little bit further about tonight. But let's begin with just the broad question of our discussion today on whether or not Africa, and by Africa I'm talking here, its leadership in government as well as in the private sector, has a strategic approach to managing its image in the global village, and whether or not it's something that Africa should be worried about or at all be trying to address. I'm talking this because of more and more negative reports, for example, around African leaders in the private sector. And by Africa, I mean black leaders in the private sector, around their complicity in the exploitation of labor and even the resources in Africa. Do you think they're really bothered about that and they have a strategy at all?
You know, Thabo, there is this saying that as long as lions do not have their historians, it is the exploits of the hunters that will be eternally recorded and not the bravery of the lion. And that is the fate of Africa. That Africa has allowed ourselves to be defined. African leaders are defined by Western media. If it is not CNN, it is Al Jazeera. If it is not Al Jazeera, it is Radio Deutsche Welle. And if it is not Deutsche Welle, it is BBC. And if it is not BBC, it is Radio France, and if it is not Radio France, it is Radio Portugal. Africa is defined in a very jaundiced way. And I think that there is a sense in which we are co-authors of our own misfortune. We allow ourselves to be divided on what I describe as the 1884-1885 Bismarckian boundaries, so that if I came to your country, South Africa, and I'm from Kenya or Mozambique, courtesy of Bismarckian boundaries, you'll refer to me as Makwerekwere, which is defined by the Europeans and informed by that. If you are South African, you go to Nigeria, you'll be defined in almost similar terms. We are co-authors of our misfortune.
And what then do we say to, for example, African leaders who deliberately want to undermine, even destroy institutions that regulate their behavior? I mean, we are talking here in South Africa, for example, about the Constitutional Court. And how it's being undermined by a former leader in the country, and how we have been hearing coming from the ruling party, for example, talk around the Constitution and it not being sacrosanct.
Let me tell you, I am following the Zondo Commission very, very keenly and on a daily basis, and when they are sitting. And one of the greatest things that has held you together as South Africans is that you have a court that functions. There is this saying that a country can survive a bad executive, a country can survive a bad legislature, But when a country undermines the judiciary, which has the mandate of settling disputes, then that country will be spiraling down the abyss. And it is incumbent upon us, wherever we are, to remember that institutions must be protected. And your country has been the exemplar in that regard. Not that I agree with everything that your country has done, but if you permit me and look at the ANC, and I'm on record as saying that in Africa there are only two classical political parties, the African National Congress and Chama cha Mapinduzi in Tanzania. And you have demonstrated that if there is a member of those institutions, then they can be brought to book and they can be made to answer to certain dictates or diktats of that particular party. And it saddens me, therefore, and permit me to be blunt in this regard, when I see President Zuma, whose freedom-fighting credentials I do not doubt, beginning to stand in the face of the judiciary and saying that he will not respond to some of the prescriptions and injunctions, I get worried. When I listen to S. Magashule saying the same thing, then I begin to get worried, because immediately that happens, you are beginning to open the doors for anarchy. And nobody wants anarchy. South Africa stands in a unique place, and how you behave will be emulated elsewhere.
Yeah. You yourself have said, and this is a narrative that is beginning to also emerge, that Africa has never been left to rest, even post-colonialism, even post-slavery. Is there a new project that is underway for Africa being handled, be it in the West, be it in the East, and by those players?
Tabo is not a new thing. Africa was victimized through slavery, victimized through colonization, victimized through apartheid, and immediately those projects had lost their shine and chin. A new project was instituted, the neo-colonial project. And Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah was as clear as he was enthusiastic and as clear as he was right in saying that imperialism has as its last face neo-colonialism, and that the imperialist distinguishes itself by wearing different masks. This is the most dangerous phase. The conceptual West, and when I talk about the conceptual West, I'm talking about Europe as you know it, I'm talking about the United States of America, I'm talking about Australia, I'm talking about New Zealand. The conceptual West have always created a legal political infrastructure whose raison d'etre is to ensure that Africa does not achieve her potential. The Chinese are the Johnny-come-latelys into the arena, and they are subtle, they are subterranean, they are pernicious, and they know what they want. And if we do not ensure that our guards are up, once again, as the Zambian Simon Kapwepwe once said, in the name of investment, the enslaver and the neo-colonizer will be with us in the same way that the Greeks came with the Trojan horse. The judgment call is ours. Are we awake or we are asleep?
Talk to me then about that intentionality, for example, of China, which you are very vocal about, the intentionality with which China is attempting to influence Africa. Is China the new bully on the block, and should they be watched and monitored regarding their intentions for Africa?
You know, China is different from the Bismarckian group who sat in Berlin in 1884 and 1885. China comes with fists of steel but the gloves are velvet. So you do not feel them. You think that they are your friends. They come, they build you stadia, they build you railways, they give you loans without asking questions. But I fear them the most because they do not say much. They are subterranean. They are like the mushroom before you. They break the earth in their softness, but the earth is broken nevertheless. And it is incumbent upon us to engage them. And my message in this regard is that we must appreciate that we are part of the globe, so that one is not saying that we should not engage the West, one is not saying that we should not engage the Indians or the Chinese or the Arabs, but we should do so on the basis of equality. And when I talk about equality, it's not the relationship between the horse and the rider, where the rider takes the credit and is the horse that wins the race. But it is a relationship which is symbiotic and mutually beneficial. As we speak now, the Chinese are riding roughshod upon us. And that we must resist. That we must discard. That we must not accept. But as I said a little earlier, we are co-authors of our own misfortune.
We'll take that a little bit further when we continue next with Professor of Law, High Court of Kenya advocate, Professor PLO Lumumba. You can be a part of this conversation. Join us as we unpack this question tonight by tagging us on Twitter at Newsroom405. WhatsApp your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584. The Newsfeed Late Night continues next. Our conversation tonight with Professor PLO Lumumba on the image of Africa and how it's handled in the global village, and whether or not there is a strategic or even positional approach that Africa takes to managing its image in the global village. I'm asking you tonight on Twitter as well as on WhatsApp. The question is, are we co-authors of our own misfortune, or is this something that is engineered from outside? We can also take your tweets at Newsroom405 or WhatsApp your comments and your questions to 072-110-5584. Prof, you're talking about us being co-authors. Now, African governments are said to be, even here in South Africa, focusing on developing infrastructure. Even post the COVID-19 pandemic, their focus is on building infrastructure as a way of rebuilding or resuscitating our economy for the future. Is this the perfect setting, would you say, for the new scramble for Africa? And how our leaders are using this particular platform, this economic resource for the region? Is it in a positive light in your view?
Tabo, let me say one or two things. One, Africa, as you know it today, is the only continent that is defined by others. So that Africa is defined as Anglophone, Francophone, Lusophone, some even say Arabophone. Africa must begin to define ourselves, and there have been attempts at doing so. The 1963 attempt at creating an Africa which was under the aegis of the Organization of African Union was one such early attempt. In the year 2000 in Sirte in Libya, we created the African Union, and we have now come up with Africa Agenda 2063 and the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. All these are designed to roll back the colonial definition of who we are. And it is done in such a manner that is informed by our history. And that history is that the colonial power divided us in order to rule us. But going forward, we must ask ourselves, why is it that we are capable of making a correct diagnosis of what the problem is, but when we apply the antidote does not serve us as well as it should? And I'm now saying that it's incumbent upon not only the political leaders, but the populace to do the following things. One, we must enhance intra-African trade, and this is the essence of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Number two, we must dissolve the boundaries, not literally, but de-emphasize the boundaries. I don't want to come to South Africa and you ask me about a visa. We must, number three, ensure that we eliminate the tariff and non-tariff barriers in the trade arena. Number four, we must move towards creating an African currency so that we de-dollarize and de-euronize our economies. Once we do these things, Africa, with a population of nearly 2 billion people, will create a market that is unrivaled in the world. And of course, the other thing that we must do is to begin to put premium on research and technology. And if you give me a little latitude, right now, your own country, South Africa, is going to be the center of manufacturing of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Yet, you and me remember that before all these vaccines were talked about, the Malagasy Institute of Applied Science had come up with COVID organic. Why did we not develop that? The Louis Pasteur Center in Dakar in Senegal had come up with a testing kit. Africa is now gleefully accepting Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Yeah. What action is required there, Prof?
Africa do?
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump in there. What action is required right there? Africa produces what it doesn't consume, or consumes what it doesn't produce. It's one of the things that you have said. We are seeing it again, as you're pointing it out, with the vaccine. So what action is required so that we just don't pontificate on ideas, but in practical terms, what needs to happen?
What needs to happen is that African political leaders need to act. And once again, I'm saying, if you look at the southern region, the anchor there is South Africa. I would want to hear President Cyril Matamela Ramaphosa saying, I'm dedicating 10% of our budget into research. I'm asking the University of Stellenbosch, with Witwatersrand, to collaborate with the University of Lagos, Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Sheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, and we are going to develop a vaccine. So that I want to hear South Africa saying the same thing. I want to hear President Buhari saying the same thing. I want to hear Prime Minister Abiy in Ethiopia saying the same thing. I want to hear Morocco saying the same thing. I want to hear Egypt saying the same thing. I want to hear Faki Mahamat at the African Union in Addis Ababa saying the same thing, so that we are deploying resources in that regard. Tabo, it pains me that as I speak to you now, Cuba, with a GDP which is 5 times lower than that of South Africa, is developing a vaccine. And you and me, on Monday, from tomorrow, Monday and Tuesday, there'll be a conference which will be attended by President Thabo Mbeki. It will be attended by President Felix Tshisekedi, Konjo Iweala, and all these. And I've posed to all of them poignant questions. What are you doing from a practical standpoint to ensure that we do the things that the population in Africa needs? Put your money where your mouth is. We have said too many things too often. Let us act.
Talk then to us about the broad normalization of these increased economic exchanges between African nations and other nations. Does this offer opportunity for Africa at all that could lead to any rapid development?
It does. My only problem now, and once again you'll permit me to go to what the conceptual West does. If you look at the regional communities in Africa, there are 8 of them. SADC, East African Community, ECOWAS, and to mention just about a few. We all agree, and under the aegis of the African Union, we have now agreed that we will not negotiate with the European Union or the Americans or the Chinese or the Indians bilaterally. We are going to negotiate in the context of the regions or in the context of Africa. What is Britain post-Brexit doing? It is now approaching her former colonies to engage in bilateral arrangements. My prescription is that we should resist that. If Lesotho wants to negotiate with the United States on any specific issue, for example, textile, let that negotiation be under the aegis of SADC at the very least, or the African Union. Once we begin to do so, we'll begin to be respected, because if China is negotiating with SADC, we are talking about a population of nearly 300 million. That is a big market. But what is Lesotho? With 2 million people, they'll not be respected. So going forward, we must remember that it is in our unity that we present a strong front. And when we present a strong front, then we are capable of engaging in genuine and legitimate negotiations with all these other powers. And it is never lost on me, even as I talk about these other powers, that ultimately we are global village. But the globalization means, or should mean, that we are at the dinner table partaking of the caviar that is served. Otherwise, our role will be that of waiters, which has been our role throughout the ages.
Well, some would say that, for example, in our trade arrangements, there is a huge trade imbalance, right? You're coming with people with huge checks to sign, while our GDP that we make in the continent in a year is probably the size of what LA makes in a week. I mean, how do you even begin to get any benefit out of that arrangement?
Stabo, you know, during my lifetime, I hope it is during your lifetime, I've seen China move from a backwater country which was disrespected across the European world. Within 30 years, they made a decision that we are going to use our resources. We are going to ensure that we are no longer exporters of primary goods. We are going to add value to every product that we deploy to the world. And within those 30 years, the Chinese have succeeded in lifting 800 million people out of poverty. And I'm saying that we can do that. We should not, and I hear President Nana Akufo-Addo in Ghana say, we are no longer going to export cocoa to Switzerland. We are going to make chocolates. I hear in Tanzania, they are saying we are no longer going to export tanzanites to be cut in Antwerp. I hear in Botswana and in Namibia saying that our diamond is not going to have the price determined in Antwerp. And I hold the view that if we did that with all our products, and we deploy not only the natural resources, but the human resource which we have, then in your lifetime, within the next 10 years, we are going to ensure that we are no longer complaining in the manner that we did. Remember, we are a population of 2 billion conservatively, and the overall GDP of the entire continent of Africa, as I speak now, is 2.5 trillion, which is slightly above the GDP of the Soviet Union or the United Kingdom, which is not so united anyway. But the most important thing is that we have that market and that we have the resolve. So going forward, I am not afraid. What I want to hear are leaders that are thinking differently, that Africa is not going to export primary products, and that we are going to engage in research and development, and we are going to engage in value addition. And that can be done, and it should be done, and your own country in South Africa has the intellectual wherewithal to provide leadership in this regard. When you are doing Johnson & Johnson, I want to hear that there will be a transfer of technology. India is now doing as AstraZeneca from Oxford, and they are doing it because there will be transfer of technology, so that going forward, they are not merely an assembly plant, but a production line that is informed by science, research and development. And that is what we should go. We have lamented for too long. We cannot remain in this space.
Festering wound that is growing in Cabo Delgado. What does Professor PLO Lumumba think of that situation when we continue next year on the Newsfeed Late Night? Stay with us. The Newsfeed Late Night continues. Thanks for staying on. Professor PLO Lumumba with us tonight. He is the Professor of Law, High Court of Kenya advocate, as well as the PLO Lumumba Foundation founder. You're part of the conversation tonight. Lots of your messages coming through on WhatsApp as well as on Twitter. We'll get to that in a moment. There are a number, Prof, of festering wounds on the continent. One we're talking about particularly now here in South Africa is the situation in Cabo Delgado and the many lives that were lost there. Regional leaders meeting to say, well, we'll send a mission to go and actually find out what's happening there and maybe decide what the way forward is. What is the AU doing in your view and what you know about that situation, and is it enough?
Tabo, first of all, AU is a very disappointing continental organization. It's in comatose. We all know the situation in Cabo Delgado is one that has been going on for the last 1 year. And my own view is that you don't need a fact-finding mission. What one needs is deployment of forces which are Pan-African, deployment of forces which are led by South Africa. South Africa is the leader in that region. President Cyril Ramaphosa should contact the president of Mozambique, and they should send a force there. They should ask for the imprimatur of the African Union, and they should move to ensure that that situation is stabilized. You will remember that during the fights against apartheid, during the days of the frontline states, President Nyerere did not call for a fact-finding mission. President Kaunda did not call for a fact-finding mission. President Samora Moises Machel did not call for a fact-finding mission. President Nkrumah did not call for a fact-finding mission when he sent his troops to the Democratic Republic of Congo. What you need is action, because what we are seeing, and it's not only in Cabo Delgado, if you go to Nigeria now, the Boko Haram, if you go to southern Cameroon, we see the same situation. Central African Republic, we see the Boko Haram that are active in Western Darfur, in South Sudan, in Western Nile, and in the Nuba Mountains, and in Abyei, in Mauritania, in Mali, and in Libya. And yet this has been declared by the African Union as the year of the silence, the decade of the silencing of the guns. After 2020, which was the year of the silencing of the guns, yielded nothing. Leadership comes from resolve. And when one is a leader, and in this regard, I must say this, that South Africa and Nigeria disappoint me a great deal. South Africa is the leader in that region. Nigeria is the leader in ECOWAS. This hesitation that they are engaged in really is frustrating, because if we don't deal with the situation in Cabo Delgado, it's going to affect Malawi, it is going to affect Tanzania, it is going to affect Comoros, it is going to affect Madagascar, it's going to affect Zimbabwe, it's going to affect South Africa, because this is political Islam. Yeah. And the essence of political Islam, if you go to the Abuja Declaration, is the Islamization of Africa and the Arabization of Africa. And I'm not talking about Islam qua Islam. I'm talking about political Islam. And that must be understood and be contra-distinguished from Islam qua Islam.
One would say the reason why, as you say, the AU is in comatose at this point is because what we have been hearing over and over again, that Mozambique is a sovereign nation, and therefore we cannot just interfere in their affairs unless they ask for the assistance.
Nonsense on stilts. I remember at one time when Bishop was the president of Grenada, and I think President Reagan was the president of the United States of America, and that was the invasion. Not that I supported it, But they argued that sometimes the leaders of a nation can be a threat to the sovereignty of the nation. And it then becomes the duty of the international community to protect the people from the hesitation of their leaders. This sovereignty business, is my view, is something that should be measured and weighed against the realities on the ground. You see images that are coming out of Cabo Delgado. You see people, I see people being slaughtered like chicken. I can't even watch for a second when you see what is happening there. Then you tell me about sovereignty, Brother Thabo? No, it is the duty of the international community to intervene, and the international community in this regard is the African Union, and that must be done, and the president of Mozambique must be told, you cannot use the shield of sovereignty because this is no longer a Mozambican issue. 2 days ago, 1,000 refugees wanted to get into Tanzania. It is the Tanzanians who prevented them. So that this thing is not only affecting Mozambique, but is beginning to affect the neighborhood. And who knows, the next time they are going to blow up the natural gas lines, and that is going to affect everybody. So we have both a duty which is continental and a duty which is human and humane at once.
What's your view on African nations like Zimbabwe rushing to get back into the Commonwealth of Independent States?
The Commonwealth is a post-colonial institution which is retained by the United Kingdom to massage its colonialist ego, and is one of the organizations which, in my view, if I was asked, should be dissolved. All African countries should belong to the African Union and cease to be a part of a post-colonial organization whose membership is merely, as I've said, and I repeat again, to massage the ego of an empire over which the sun is now setting.
Now, of course, a broad question now for you, Prof, is you've mentioned, and you seem to pin some hope on Agenda 2063. There have been other interventions. There's been the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. There's been the Millennial Development Goals. There's also been NEPAD. I mean, what is different about Agenda 2063 that gives you so much hope?
You are so right. It did not start there. It started with the Lomé Convention of 1985, the Cotonou Agreement of 2001, the Lagos Plan of Action, as you said, of 1980, then the NEPAD, and now NEPAD AUDA. And my own view is that there is, and if you listened and read the letter, the imaginary fictional letter that Nkosazana and Dlamini Zuma wrote to Nkrumah on the day of the establishment of Agenda 2063, it was an acknowledgement that Africa Agenda 2063 is nothing new. It is actually a rehash of the Lagos Plan of Action. And the fact that we now have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat now set in Accra, Ghana from the 1st day of January this year, and the fact that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala is now at the helm of WTO, and Akinwumi Adesina is now the head of African Development Bank. This is not serendipitous. This is providence. And I hold the view that if we apply sufficient pressure, and that pressure includes institutions such as the media, such as yourself, the intellectuals, and the civil society, if we apply this pressure sufficiently, there may very well be a difference, because I hear voices across the continent. I hear Rwanda, I hear South Africa, I hear Namibia, I hear Botswana, I hear Ghana. Many other countries are now beginning to think differently. I hear Tanzania with Suluhu Samia now having taken over from my friend Magufuli. There is a new reawakening. And it is incumbent upon you, it is incumbent upon me to ensure that our voices remain alive, even if they are not heard at their most eloquent. This is not for the faint-hearted. This is not microwave solution. This is not instant coffee. This is intergenerational. And if you look at it from that perspective, then you will not have regrets.
Let's look at some questions coming through tonight on WhatsApp. This one is from Bonga. Bonga, here's a question for you, Prof. It says, Professor, what do you think contributed to the poor response of African countries to COVID-19? Do you think the poor response has anything to do with Africa's underdevelopment?
No, our response was not poor. You know, our problem is that we measure ourselves against Western prescription. The Westerners want us to say, when they ask us to jump, we ask how high. What happened in Africa is that we responded as was dictated by our own circumstances. We listened to the prescriptions of the World Health Organization, and in many African countries, we then instituted protocols which were informed by our realities. We were reconciling our environment and asking ourselves, are the solutions we are deploying worse than the problem? And in many African countries, I think the reaction was good. In South Africa, you know, you are level 1 to level 5 reactions, quite good, sometimes almost punitive. In Tanzania, they adopted a system and a reaction that was incomparable to the reaction of Sweden, the reaction of Taiwan, the reaction of South Korea. So it is not underdevelopment. We were informed by our peculiar circumstances. And if you look at the situation in Africa, there is a sense in which we have not borne the brand of COVID-19 as much as Latin America or North America or Europe has. So we ought not to judge ourselves harshly. We behave decently, and in truth, we have come out a little better than other regions. What we ought to do is not to lower our guards. What we ought not to do is to be over-dependent of them. What we ought not to do is to swallow line who can sinker what they tell us.
Yeah. What do you make, though, of the nonchalant or apathetic, even sometimes denialist response some African leaders have given to the situation of COVID-19?
There was no denialism. When you hear denialism, first of all, they are speaking in English, not in our mother tongue. When you hear denialism, they are simply saying that is the Western and Westernized media. And when you hear denialism, they are normally talking about people like President John Joseph Pombe Magufuli. They did not deny it. And I was in Tanzania during that period. They simply said that we know that there is something called COVID-19. But what we are saying is that we have our own way. We are not just about to shut down our economies. We are not just about to accept everything they tell us. We are going to second guess them. And one of the greatest things that the Caucasians hate is to be second guessed. Because, and allow me to be blunt in this, the Caucasians, at least the institutional conceptual West, proceeds from the premise that Africans are stupid and that African leaders are stupid. So then when you respond to them in a manner that demonstrates that you are not stupid, then they are irritated. Then they call you a denialist. Then they label you. And because they control the media and they control everything in the world, they make you look bad. They control social media and everything. They can paint you. They can paint you. They can bring in bloggers. They can bully you. They can call you names. And as the old English saying goes, give a dog a bad name and hang it. And that is what they do to us.
Newsroom Africa news feed late night continues for you in a moment with all your questions coming through tonight on WhatsApp as well as on the Twitter handle at Newsroom405. Stay with us. We'll continue in a moment. Back, you're live with us here on the news feed late night in broad conversation with Professor Pialo Lumumba on the management of Africa's image in the global village, but also other issues that are emerging around those that need to be monitored and that need to be carefully scrutinized, and their intentions and interests in the African continent. Prof, talk to me about why Africa is so attractive. I suppose it has always been attractive, but there seems to be a renewed scramble for Africa.
You know, Thabo, Africa has been attractive throughout the ages. The Greeks were here, the Romans were here, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Belgians, everybody has been here. The Americans are here, the Chinese are here, the Arabs are here. Africa is attractive primarily because of our natural resources. And right now it is also attractive because of our human resource. Remember, there was a time when we were a resource as a people. We were commodified. And it is now attractive because the rest of the world have destroyed what they had. Europe has destroyed our environment. The Chinese have destroyed their environment. Everybody has destroyed what they had. And Africa is the new factory of the world. It is the new hunting ground of the world. And that is not a bad thing in and of itself. It is how we leverage on it. It is how we interact with those who want to be the hunters. The Chinese now know, and everybody knows, that if you want to make a mobile phone, the place to find the essential ingredient is the Democratic Republic of Congo, coltan, rare earth. We have over 80% of that in the world. If you want to make a nuclear bomb, you go to Burkina Faso, you go to Niger. So there is a sense in which we are attractive because of what we have. The danger to us is that we are allowing these countries to take these things for a pittance. And that is why they want to retain us in a state of disorganization. That is why they hate it when we are organized. That is why they hate it when they hear us speak the way we are speaking. Because up till now, there was wax in our ears. There were scales in our eyes. The wax is melting. The scales are falling. And they will no longer take the things that we have the way they used to do. And that is our salvation.
The wax is melting, the scales are falling. As you're talking about our salvation, a question from Charles. He says, Thabo, how can South Africa, for example, respond actively to the warning by Professor tonight while we have long been in bed with China through BRICS?
There is nothing wrong with your being in bed with China, but are you the sheets or your partner in the bed? And that is the problem in Africa, that sometimes we are in these arrangements and we're in arrangements where we are subservient. I hold the view that it is incumbent upon Africa as we know it to determine the status of our engagement with the rest of the world. The truth be told is that BRICS is an arrangement which is designed to be a counterweight to what is happening in Europe. So what I want to see is an Africa, a South Africa which is strong in that arrangement, a South Africa which believes in herself, a South Africa which is representative of the continent of Africa, and a South Africa which is not being dictated to, but which is contributing and is accepted as such. I have no problem with South Africa and BRICS, but I would be happier with South Africa in the African Union arena and under the aegis of the African Development Bank, rather than a remote arrangement, which as it is now, is being choreographed from Beijing with a little augmentation from Brasilia in Brazil.
We've seen a lot of the African countries being hit. In fact, hit is probably an understatement, but obliterated by the COVID-19 pandemic as far as the economies are concerned. And the African countries rushing to get some loans from the likes of the IMF, for example, they say on favorable terms. What is your view on that?
There are two things that the Western Europe and the Bretton Woods institution did to Africa. First of all, we are beholden to them because the international community is dollarized, so that our economies are shadow economies which are dependent on dollars in international trade. That is number one. Number two, outside of that, they have ensured that even Pan-African institutions such as the African Development Bank are still very dependent on the United States of America. Number three, they have ensured that they control our countries through bilateral relationships. And whenever you see the IMF or any of the Bretton Woods institutions intervening in the affairs of a country, it tells you that you are in a very bad space. What should we do? my own view, and I am afraid that this is one of the most unfortunate things that is not happening. I would have expected that there would be an emergency meeting of the African Union heads of states and government to look at the economies of Africa in the context of COVID-19. And if they did that, Africa has the capacity to ensure that we don't borrow from IMF and World Bank. Some of these monies that we are borrowing, if we marshal within the continent of Africa, if we were to put together the private sector in Africa and governments in Africa, I believe that the countries that are badly exposed could actually borrow from within the continent and not be beholden to IMF and World Bank and China. But because we don't do that, and that is one of the bribes that I have with the African Union, convene an urgent meeting of the African Union with only one agenda, the economy of the continent in the context of COVID-19, and bring in private sector, bring in governments, bring in civil society, and you will be amazed at what could happen.
And Prof, I think this one is perfect for you to tackle as well. From King, he says, what is your take in Africa's education system? Why do we produce bookish scholars but zero investors? But also, and take it further, others have said Prof. Lumumba has got brilliant theories, but we never see his theories being applied, for example, in his home country, in Kenya.
You know, that is the problem. It is Socrates who said that condemnation without investigation is the worst form of ignorance. And many people are up to do that. They should ask me at an individual level, what do I do? First of all, I'm not in government. But without being in government, I run a foundation which is present in 38 African countries. And I'm working with young people. And if you ask the young people, I'm making my contribution. But if you go to many African countries to talk about that, in any country, there are theoreticians and practitioners. And one of the things that we should do, and this is the contribution that some of us make, is to irritate governments into action. And beyond irritation, we must ask ourselves, what are we doing in our villages? So that, as Franklin Delano Roosevelt said in 1912, it is not the critic who matters. It is those who, beyond criticism and critiquing,